Hey guys, welcome back to another Default Cube CG Matter tutorial, and today I want to show you how to do some tracker removal because I promised that in the last tutorial, so that is why, and somebody asked for that before in the comment section. So what we're going to be doing is taking this footage, make sure there's no volume, because I don't want it going into the mic. You know, I recorded this tutorial just before this, and it was 28 minutes, so I'm going to try to do it a bit faster. It doesn't have to be much faster, but just a bit faster. Hopefully I can get my point across. But we have this footage. It's a bit different from the footage in the last tutorial, and we are going to be tracking it and then removing the piece of paper. So ideally, we use this thing to track our shot. Again, this QR code thing is called an April tag. I have a tutorial about how to use these things. We use it to motion track. We put some 3D thing in our scene, and then we get rid of the evidence. We get rid of this paper because I don't know what short film would want that in it. So that is the game plan. Again, we are going to be tracking this again, so I'm going to be doing it in real time as opposed to doing the tutorial approach for that part. So I'm just going to kind of remind you of the workflow, and then we're going to do the removal. That's the plan. Let's do this second take. So first of all, we need to open Blender, and again, we need to take this footage, convert it into an image sequence, and then use April tools to do our motion tracking. So let's go to the video editing workspace. We're going to add in our movie. In this case, I called it footage, so it'd be super easy to find. We can get rid of the audio track, although it doesn't matter, and then make sure that in the render tab, under color management, you have this set to standard. Again, this changes the color space back to what it would be, right, without messing with it, so we don't have any weird color correction or color grading. Footage is as is, and then we're just going to trim it. So we can have it start here on frame 12. I don't see why not. 12 is a lucky number when it comes to eggs, and we can have it end here in 164. That is an even number. That is what is special about it. And it's also divisible by 4. 41 times 4. Hopefully that's right. Okay, so we've trimmed our footage, and we want to output this as an image sequence, so go to the Output tab, and we are going to choose PNG is fine. Again, JPEG sequence, PNG sequence, maybe a couple others are compatible with April tools, but PNG sequence is fine. No need for compression, and then also somebody recommended to not output an alpha channel since we're not using it, and that's an okay tip, so let's just do it. Since everything is supposed to be 100% opaque, that is wasted data, although I don't think it's that much data, but that's fine. We need to make an output directory for this, so desktop, I'm going to call this second take, because I'm a bit pissed off, but that's fine. Second take. Call this our sequence with an underscore. Again, that's because of the indexing. And then Control F12 is going to start rendering. It's going to be using Eevee, I think, by default. But it should be very fast, because really what's happening is in the compositing, really we're just having, I guess it doesn't matter because it's using the video sequence editor. As you can see in the output tab under post-processing, we have sequencer enabled. So that is something to know. And Blender crashed, but I think that's fine if it... Yes, it made it all the way through. I don't know why it crashed, but that is what happens. That is a live tutorial. So, luckily for us, we didn't need it. So what we are going to do is now open up Command Prompt so we can use April Tools. Again, open up your April Tools folder with the bin. Check out the tutorial if you have no idea what I'm talking about. Seriously, this is a great way to motion track, so just watch that tutorial. We need to copy this address, change directory to that. Somebody said there's a faster way to do all this, and I don't care. I don't know. It's a good tip. I just don't want to use it right now. We are going to launch apriltools.exe. It's going to throw us an error, but it's also going to tell us what we need to type in, which is the reason I do it. So again, we run April Tools with our path to the footage, which again, in this case is going to be, what did we call it? I already forget. We called it second take. We just need to copy this address. Copy that address. Somebody said there's a shortcut for this, but that is fine again. Put in that path. I don't know my sensor width, just like last time I didn't improve, even though it's different footage. So we're going to have it estimate all that stuff. So estimate focal length. That's what I meant. I didn't know the focal length. I'm filming on a phone, so I really don't know. Estimate focal length, enter, and it's going to be processing through all of that. Again, this step is not the motion tracking. It's just going to give us a focal length in pixels, which we're going to use for the actual camera solve. And you can see currently there are 0 blurry frames, which is good. No unusable frames, no blurry frames, that is fine. And right now it's converging on some number, should be around 1800. Get a sip of water while I can. Okay, there we go. We have a focal length in pixels of 1827. 1827.8, as you can see right there. We are then going to type in this command. So this is going to be our motion tracking again. So again, this is about the speed I do it in real time when I'm using this for my own VFX shots. So this is useful to see, I think. Path to our footage. Copy that. Paste that. And then focal length in pixels, since we didn't know it and we had it estimate, is 1827.80, and then the tag size, which is something you had to measure. Where did I put it? I'm still using the same printout, and you can see I did a bit of math. I don't know if you can see that. Let's see, can you see that? Made a bit of writing over here. But it's 169 millimeters about. Boom. So there we go. Now it's going to do our motion tracking. And again, this is going to output in a text file right now that it's writing. So I don't want to open that till it's done. I don't want to accidentally corrupt the file and have to do a third take. No, no third takes. Okay. Come on. And it's a shame because I did such a good explanation in the last video. It's just so long, you know. But I do think it's important to include this tracking for the reasons I said, and I'm not going to say them again. Okay, there we go. We have blah, 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 usable. There we go. And you can see no blurry frames, no unusable frames. That means we probably have a good solve. And you can see we have our text file with the camera coordinates and orientations and all that, and that is good. So now we are going to open Blender again because it crashed. I think it was because I was like messing with stuff as it was rendering is what must have happened. That is fine. That means we just need to go to the render tab again, set this to standard, the color management view transform, because we still need that. That's fine. And then in the output, I think we are using a frame rate of 30, which automatically gets set when we import our footage. But again, it crashed. So now what we need to do is set this to full screen so I don't annoy anybody. Delete everything, file, import. Again, we're using the April Tools add-on. There's a tutorial. And we are going to import second take our track. This is the April Tools file. Moving camera is fine since the object is stationary, being the tag. Okay, there we go. And now let's just make sure this looks good. I guess it needed a second to import stuff in. I see what happened. You see that it's blank for a couple frames, and then on frame 11, it magically appears. Again, that's because it crashed, and initially we trimmed it to, you know, here, I suppose. There we go. And I guess it ends a bit late as well, so we'll go to 163. But ideally, you don't have to do that if your Blender didn't crash. And you can see we are getting a pretty good camera solve. There is a bit of shake, which is actually going to be important for what we're doing, but whatever. Okay, so how do we actually remove this? What is the methodology, the ideology, how are we going to do it? Basically, when you film yourself and you want yourself to disappear like a ghost, how would you do that effect? Well, you need to film what's also behind you so that when you drop your own transparency, whatever behind you is starting to appear. So, in the same kind of idea, to get rid of this piece of paper, this giant tracker, what we need is the surface under it. So we need to paint what the floor would look like if we were to get rid of this and then project that over our paper, and you know that makes sense. And the reason this is kind of specific to this case is because if you have a smaller tracker, not a giant piece of paper, but just like a Sharpie dot, Acne, anything that's one dot, you probably wouldn't use this method. You just blur it out, right? You don't need to project the skin back over it. So this is kind of unique to this method. So because we need to project some floor back over this, we need to have some geometry that covers it. Luckily for us, we can take this plane, scale it up. Again, now it's covering our piece of paper. We can go into wireframe and see that. Look at that. And because it's motion tracked, it's always going to cover our piece of paper because the April Tools method has the highest accuracy around the tracker, right? If we put the plane over here when like, oh, I ate too much rice. If we put the plane over there, it would have a lot more wobble in space, that is. Now, you can definitely see that there's still a bit of shake going on, and that just sucks, you know. That means you're probably going to have to do some manual adjustment, but for now, let's ignore that and just go on with the method. So we need to paint what the floor would look like, and I'm just going to make this a bit bigger. And to do that, first of all, we need to extract the texture of this area, and you'll see what I mean. So go to the shading workspace, see our camera view. Okay, there we go. Again, it's gray because it has no material or texture or whatever. So we are going to apply a material, and then we are going to bring in an image texture and make that our background, and that meaning the image sequence. So just connect that to the surface. Make sure that in your frames, again, this is an image sequence, so we're concerned about how many frames it lasts. Just pick a giant number, last for 500 frames, whatever, as long as it's bigger than 164 or whatever it was. I don't remember. And this is all fine. Make sure and enable these two. Auto refresh is the one that's important because it means it can actually play our footage. This is a texture that actually animates. So that is what the auto refresh does. If we disable it, it doesn't work. There we go. But you can see that we're trying to extract. I guess it really doesn't like that first frame. I really wish it didn't crash. Let's have it start on frame 12. That is fine. You can see that, it's animated, it's the same piece of footage, but it's not really the right, doesn't have the floor that we want. It has like too much. It has like the piece of door over here. So to fix that, we need to change the texture coordinates. So make sure you have node wrangler enabled so you can hit Control T or just manually add in these two nodes and then switch over. I guess we don't even need this mapping node. Just switch over to window coordinates instead of UV or whatever it was using. And you can see that now it's using the correct, section of our video, and it kind of looks brighter than everything else, but that's because what we need to do, select our camera properties, background images. Again, this is what we're seeing back here. It's not actually there to render, right? We can disable it. It's just an overlay, but we can make this overlay opaque. And you can see everything's blending in. Again, if we had our color space different, it would look wrong. You can see a bit of the seam over here. And now you can still kind of see it, but it looks a bit better. You shouldn't be able to see it that much. I guess it's just because when we play, there's like 1 frame of offset because it needs to catch up. But if we go frame by frame, it should be perfect. Okay, cool. Okay, so now what we need to do is extract this texture, modify it, meaning get rid of the piece of paper, and then slap it back on the plane, which is over the piece of paper, right? That's the idea. So to extract this texture, we don't need to extract, the whole piece of footage, but just a single frame. Now, it is possible to export the whole piece of footage, but that actually requires a bit of scripting because you can't bake animations natively, and you have to do a bit of scripting, and it's not necessarily worth it. So we're just going to find a frame where the plane is entirely inside our shot, meaning none of this, cheeky not being in frame stuff. Okay, this is not very good, so we're going to pick something from later on. Or we could just make our plane smaller. I guess that's another method. Again, since we're using window coordinates, it will autocorrect. Okay, so let's say that this is the frame we want. There's nothing wrong with it. Just make sure that there's no motion blur. So your texture doesn't have a lot of blur on it. And then we just want to extract this. And to do that, make sure you are in cycles, because currently Eevee doesn't support baking, although I don't know if it ever will. I don't know if it's possible. For your samples, bring them down to 1, because we are just baking what is essentially an emission pass, so there's no need for any light bounces, whatever. So 1 should be fine with GPU, because I have a good GPU. And then, I need a burp. And then what we need to do is have it have a texture to write on. So Shift-A, image, texture, and we're going to create a new texture inside this node. Call it too much rice. I had some lemongrass beef and it's coming up, This resolution is fine. Again, this footage is 1920 by 1080, so 1080p, but we're only taking this section of it, so it's even less than that. So this is 1K by 1K texture is fine. Okay, cool. So we have this node. We have our plane, and then all you have to do is make sure the plane is selected, make sure this node is selected, otherwise it won't work. And then in the bake options, we are going to choose emission, although combine should work as well. Emission, margin of 0, since we don't need any padding on our texture, and boom, hit bake. And you're going to see it does it pretty quickly since we only had 1 sample, etc. Now, I don't believe this should have any distortion. I need to look into that, but if it does have distortion, the way you fix that, the same way with project from view, you subdivide a couple times. before you do the baking. Now, it is possible this has a bit of distortion, but we are going to assume it doesn't. These lines look pretty straight. Okay, so point is, we have this texture, and now we need to save it, modify it, and then reapply it. So Shift-S lets us save. Desktop, we're going to call this texture Too Much Rice, PNG. No compression. Again, there's no alpha channel to worry about. All opaque. Save that. Save it. There we go. And now what you want to do is do some, I guess you could use content aware, or you can use clone stamping, whatever method to put a floor where this piece of paper is. Now, normally I'd use something like Photoshop or GIMP, but it's a Blender tutorial, so we're going to do it the way that kind of sucks, but it's in Blender. Go to Texture Paint. It's going to have our image, which is the weird thing about this. Oh, by the way, we haven't saved yet, which is important. Wow, there we go. Save. Make sure to save. That's very important, especially when you're like extracting, bringing in textures. You don't want to lose any of your progress. The weird thing about this is you can paint right here on the 2D view, right? We're changing the texture. You can see that over here. But if we choose cloning, which is what we want, you want to hit Control and then do this, but it doesn't work. I don't know if it's a bug or if it's something I'm missing, but it doesn't work, whereas painting does work. But in the 3D viewport, it does. So that's where we're going to do it. So let's just bring that over. Go to the top view, so it's as if we're looking at it from the 2D view. Hide our camera, and again, we can paint, but then here also cloning works. And you can see it updates over here. So I don't know if that's a bug or something, but whatever. Crash course on this. F is for scale, Shift F is for strength. Keep that at 1. You control click to sample, so let's say control click here samples this area, and then I paint it by just clicking. And we want to make sure our stroke has no spacing, or the smallest spacing possible. Okay, I'm losing my voice. Let's finish this. So how do we actually paint this out? Without using content to where it takes a lot of time, so I'm just going to sample this line and then draw along where the line would be. And you just kind of want to imagine what the texture would look like. I'm not going to do that good of a job because it's a tutorial. Not that I could do better otherwise if I was spending time on it. But basically the theory of it is we just need to paint over where our piece of paper is. You can do this as well. Do this as to the best of your ability. Because the better you do this, the better your removal will end up looking. Because this is what we're projecting back over it. If the floor looks wonky, it's your fault because you didn't paint it well. So let's just do that. There we go. You can see it looks a bit glitchy, but that's fine because I don't care. Almost done. Now ideally, maybe a better approach is to make your plane a bit bigger so you have more texture to sample from. Again, we would have extracted a bigger section of our video, so we would have had more texture to work with. But then there's also the issue we had before where we need the whole plane inside the shot for at least one frame. Okay, so just paint this out. Again, you could have just, we exported this. You could have just brought it into GIMP, done it there, and then, import it back in. And that is what I would normally do. But this method isn't all too bad. I just really don't like texture painting in Blender. It needs work. I think everybody knows it. We can also do this in 3D space, by the way, if that is something you are more comfortable with. Although I don't see why you wouldn't use the top view for just, something flat. We're not like doing a 3D model that isn't planar. Okay, almost done. Almost done. You can see why the first tutorial took so long. I also made a tiny mistake, so I'm like, I may as well. Because, yeah. Thank you, patrons, by the way. Okay, there we go. Okay, yeah, that's looking a bit wonky. Just quick corrections. Boom. Correction here. Boom. Okay, so let's say you're happy with this. Again, this is what it looks like over here. It's not honestly the worst thing in the world, but spend more time on this or do it in a different program. When you're done with this, we just want to save it out. And I think Shift-S, no. Do you have to go to View, Shift-S? No. Just go to Image, Save As, which again is Shift-S. I don't know why it wasn't working. It seems like all this is not working how I'd expect. But we're going to save this as Too Much Rice, but this time Too Much Rice Fixed, because we got rid of the piece of paper. RGB, PNG, all that's fine. Okay, cool. So now, let's go to layout. Now, we should have in our desktop, because that's where I saved them, we have this texture, which is the fixed one, and then this original one. And the only difference between them is, the area around this piece of paper that was clone stamped. And now if we go back to Blender, go to shading, you can see that right now we're still using this image sequence, which is dependent on our window coordinates. Again, that's perspective dependent, so it kind of looks weird if you're not in the camera view. So we can just delete this. Use our plane, which again is, what am I saying? Use our texture, which is, if I can connect it, which is too much rice, which again we edited, so it's kind of gone, but we exported it before. So what I'm saying is if we import it now, right, too much rice, it's going to have the piece of paper, and we can make a duplicate of this, which is going to be unlinked, and we can choose the fixed version. And basically what I'm saying here is we have one texture, which is the extracted one. By the way, go back to Eevee. Don't waste any processing power on this nonsense. Basically, we're just projecting this texture, which is not perspective dependent anymore. We're not using window coordinates. I think we're using UV coordinates probably. And you can see that this actually matches pretty well. There's a bit of a misalignment, and it will only be perfect on whatever frame we extracted it on. That's where it's going to line up. And then whether or not it lines up for the rest of your shot depends on your camera solve, which again, this kind of proves that April Tools has a bit too much wiggle. But there actually is a way to address this. Maybe we'll talk about it. Or what you can do is you can use this edited version, which you can almost see what the final effect is going to look like over here. We're just going to project this over our footage. That's the idea. I don't know why there's construction going on at 10:30 p.m. outside. Hopefully that's not too loud. Okay, cool. So let's say that we are happy with that. We're not, but let's say, let's say that it's good enough. Let's see what happens when we render a frame. By the way, is this updated? There we go. Let's see what happens when we render a frame. F12. Boom, you have your, our tile that we edited without the background, and in fact with a gray background. So how do we fix this? Well, first of all, there is a environment background that we need to get rid of. Again, this world is gray. If we make it red, you're going to see now there's red. So what we need to do to fix that, again, it doesn't matter what color it is since we're just plugging in a texture, right? There's no BSDF. It doesn't react to the light or the environment lighting. What we need to do is go to the Render tab, go to Film, Enable Transparent, Render, and now it's in the void, but a transparent void, which means we can put our footage underneath it, right, in terms of layers. That's what you'd want to do. So what we're going to do is you can do the really bad approach, which is to make a plane behind this that has the background using window coordinates. Doesn't make sense. So just go to the compositing workspace, enable nodes, which should be enabled by default. I don't know why it isn't. I don't know if anybody's ever gone to compositing and not enabled use nodes. Basically, we have our render layers node, which we can view, Control-Shift-Click, or just add a viewer node, like a scrub. So make sure you have Node Wrangler enabled so you can use those shortcuts. We have our tile. Again, it doesn't really update because we need to render, right? And now it's going to be in a different location, and again, different location. Again, if you don't know about render layers, this is rendering our view layer, which is to say this layer, we can just call it layer 1. This is where everything's happening. And then render layers has a layer 1 inside our scene. Let's render that again. So what we want to do is we want to take this and put our footage underneath. So let's import in our footage. So that is a image node, which is the same thing as an image texture node, really. Import in our sequence. Boom. Make sure we have more frames. So this time 50,000. Why not? Lots of frames, as long as it's more than the actual length of your footage. And if we view this, you're going to notice that it actually updates because, it's an image sequence. You can't play it because the compositor still doesn't have like pre-caching or whatever. But you can go frame by frame and see that it works. And we want to overlay these two together. So click, shift click, so we have both of these selected, or just do that. And then Control-Alt-0 adds an alpha over node, or you could just, alpha over node and add that, and it takes a while. But that's the shortcut, Control-Alt-0. And if we view this, you're going to see it just kind of looks like our image sequence. And that's because the second socket, which is actually what's in the foreground, because of the bad design, they put it in the second socket. The foreground is the sequence, but we want the foreground to be the render layer. So render layer is on top, footage on bottom. So switch these, or use the command Alt-S switches them. And you can see now it works, except it's kind of taking this tile from a different frame. So update it with an F12. Boom. It looks horrible, but it's removed, in theory. So there are a couple things we can do to actually make this look better. So the first one is the manual approach that takes forever, but it's the right thing to do. So what we're going to do in this case is we're just going to slide this around. You see it's not aligning in terms of this align. There's a bit of a gap. So what you can do is, again, this is just motion tracked. In reality, it's not moving, so we can still keyframe this. So what you can do is, be like, oh, on this frame, I need it to be around here, line it up, add a keyframe, go over here, add another keyframe, etc. Actually, this is pretty good. Let's do that. We're going to add a location keyframe, keep playing it until it kind of looks misaligned. So far, it's still good. Add another keyframe. So far, it's just constant. Then at some point, it should drift a little. Yeah, you saw a bit of wiggle there? I did. We can adjust that just a bit. And you can also adjust along the y-axis. So this is just the manual approach to kind of clean up your work. And then over here, you see there's a bit of drifting. Bring that back over. And you could even do a bit of rotation. You see it's actually matching here, but not over here, which probably means we need to do a bit of rotation. That's fine. We're just going to set all these keyframes to linear interpolation. Let's see what that looks like. That's actually a major improvement. We could just add one or two more keyframes right there. Anywhere where it kind of looks misaligned. This is a tutorial. I'm not going to do it, perfectly. Okay, that looks good, except for the wobble, but let's imagine that isn't there. Now, if we go to a random frame, again, in the compositing, we have all this, and the alpha over node is going to our composite node, which means it's going to be rendered. Again, output has the post-processing with compositing enabled. We render this. It almost looks pretty good, honestly, except for this hard edge, which we're going to get rid of now. To fix this, you can see that our render layers node also has an alpha channel. This is basically saying this is where there is stuff. In this case, it's just where the plane is. And if we use this alpha output, this alpha channel, we can put it in the factor of the alpha over node, which isn't going to change anything, but we can add a dilate/erode node, which is going to soften our alpha. So let's view that. We can set this to feather. A large feather value will feather it outwards. A negative, large in the negative magnitude, negative is going to feather it, but now it's going to contract instead of expand. So dilate, erode. Let's do -100. It's going to soften this a little. And now let's see what that looks like. Again, it's using this dilate/erode node as the factor. Ooh, that is looking good. And in case you can't tell, let's see let's see the before and after. So this is before. Let's get closer on some of these edges. So look over here. So this is before, after. It almost takes it all the way there, honestly. So really the tricks are to do this manual keyframing and to also do the feathering. Again, we need to update that. And then let's say we're happy with this. I don't know what else there is to do. I mean, you could put something over it now. Like you could put whatever 3D object you want to do. But again, this is just about removal. So let's take care of that. We want to output this as a result. So take this alpha over node, make sure it's in the composite so everything's being rendered through here. And then we are going to export this as, I don't see why not JPEG sequence. Like, I don't care about the quality of this. I don't care about the quality of this. Let's bring it down to 0% quality JPEGs. See if they look like compressed as whatever. Let's see. Desktop, directory. Let's call it output, remove. We can also call this sequence. And then let's see, we are using Eevee probably. Yes, Eevee 11. That is good. And I guess we are ready to render. So Control F12.